of the rights of women.
We don't have a teen sports problem. We have an adult harassment and bullying problem.
They not belong competing against those girls, period.
You have to have everybody on the same even playing field. I say knock yourself out, start your own league. Start your own transgender league.
Welcome to our digital town hall, Trans Athletes and the Future of Fair Play. I'm Liz Gonzalez with Fox 26 News in Fresno. This is an issue that has drawn very strong opinions, and especially in California over just the past 2 weeks after a transgender athlete competed against girls in the state track and field finals. While that event is over, the fight continues. Over the next half hour or so, we're going to look at how did we get here? What policies have allowed transgender athletes to compete with girls? What's being done about it? President Trump has been among the most vocal critics, and we'll look at some of the actions that he's taken on this issue. What does the average person think about this? There is research that has been done on this issue, and we'll speak with those behind that research. California isn't the only state, by the way, where the issue of transgender athletes in girls' sports is a political hot potato. So what other states across the country also allow trans athletes, and what's happening there? But California is the state that is being singled out by President Trump over this issue right now. So why is that? We're going to check in with Sinclair National correspondent Kayla Gaskins in Washington with a look at what could be motivating the president to throw his political power against the Golden State. And by the way, you'll want to keep your cell phone handy, as we do have a poll question so we can get your take on this issue. Okay, so we're going to start with a bit of history here. Trans athletes have been allowed to compete in California sports since 2014. That is when Assembly Bill 1266, known as the School Success and Opportunity Program, took effect. The law grants California's transgender and gender nonconforming students from grades kindergarten through 12 equal access to educational resources and participation in programs and activities that are consistent with their gender identity. This includes athletic teams and competitions and use of facilities consistent with his or her gender identity, irrespective of the gender that's listed on the student's records. Governor Gavin Newsom shocked LGBTQ athletes when he called it, quote, deeply unfair for transgender athletes to participate in girls' sports, a stance that he defended yet again last week during a literacy event at a school.
I've expressed my point of view on the issue. Legislature has a different point of view. The law was enshrined by the former governor. The law needs to change in the state of California for that process to unfold differently. But I think we would all do much better focusing on the critical issue of literacy and the critical issue of education in this country that is so much more important than the distraction that often is the weaponization on this issue.
By the way, Newsom said that his 2 daughters and his wife, who played soccer at Stanford University, formed his thinking on this issue. As we mentioned, get your phones ready because we want to know, do you believe transgender athletes should be allowed to compete in high school girls' sports? Yes or no? You can chime in with your answer on our website. Just search KMPH.com, or better yet, again, if you've got your phone, just scan the QR code that is right there on your screen. You will see that QR code from time to time up on the screen. In case you don't have a chance to vote right now, you will throughout the course of this town hall. So far, an overwhelming majority, 95% of you, are saying that transgender athletes should not be allowed to compete in girls' high school sports. Again, we'll be following up on that throughout this town hall. Now, we looked at the issue from the state side. Now let's check out the federal side. President Trump ran on a campaign promise and delivered when he signed an executive order in February banning trans athletes from participating in women's sports. The actual name of that order, by the way, is the Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports Order.
We will defend the proud tradition of female athletes, and we will not allow men to beat up, injure, and cheat our women and our girls. From now on, women's sports will be only for women.
But legal experts immediately said that that executive order can and would be challenged. According to the Williams Institute at UCLA School of Law, 27 states have a transgender sports participation ban. There is, by the way, no solid research on the number of high school transgender athletes. But according to testimony from the NCAA president, Charlie Baker, last December, he said there were fewer than 10 transgender college student athletes among the 510,000 NCAA athletes total. Late last month, A.B. Hernandez of Jurupa Valley High School in Riverside County qualified, competed, and won at the California Interscholastic Federation State Track and Field Championships. A.B. identifies as a transgender female. The CIF faced pressure from all sides and actually created a pilot program for this event as a result. The program allowed A.B. to compete, but A.B.'s finish would not affect the outcome for biological girls. A.B. competed in the high jump, long jump, and triple jump, winning 2 out of the 3 events. It is worth noting that A.B. is the first transgender athlete to compete in the CIF championships, but not the first to qualify. 2 years ago, 2 other trans athletes qualified, but did not show up. Now, those who competed against A.B. said that the atmosphere on the field was welcoming. Brooke White ended up with a second-place medal in the girls' long jump event at the state finals. She shared silver and a place on the podium with A.B. She says that A.B.'s performance and grace through the situation inspired her.
Me really emotional, seeing how people could be so hateful to a 16-year-old girl. It also eased me a lot to talk to A.B. personally and see how she was handling the situation as a rock star. Like, just, you know, she PR'd and I'm pretty sure all 3 events. Overall, I just want to help foster peace and community and acceptance.
Outside the stadium and even above the track meet, there were calls, by the way, to keep trans athletes out of girls' sports. As you mentioned, at one point that plane even flew above the event with a banner reading "No Boys and Girls Sports." A group of protesters wanted to voice its opposition to what it sees as an injustice. That's even after the CIF offered that pilot program solution. Following the championships, the Department of Justice sent out a letter to school districts across California. That letter went out last week. It said the districts are exposing themselves to legal liability as members of the California Interscholastic Federation. That's because CIF bylaws allow trans athletes to compete against biological females. The letter cites the 14th Amendment of the Constitution prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sex. It goes on to say that allowing trans athletes to compete against girls deprives the girls of opportunities and benefits, and that amounts to sex discrimination. The letter instructed school districts to certify in writing they would not follow the CIF's bylaws. Well, days later, Chino Valley Unified School District in the Inland Empire voted to respond to the DOJ's letter.
XX does not equal XY. Common sense will be common again, and will protect everything that I have.
Chino Valley Unified School Board President Sonia Shaw talked with Fox 26 News Director Jim Jacobs about whether the pilot program at the CIF Track and Field Championships went far enough to make things right, and she shared her satisfaction over the DOJ's involvement in this case.
God for Hermit Dillon, because she's been on the ground fighting this before she was appointed by Trump. And it pretty much says that we need to certify that we are going to comply with the Equal Protection Clause, because right now CIF is violating that in their rules by allowing males in the girls' divisions. And so here we are now as school districts having to deal with the mess that the state has caused. We know Newsroom and the rest of them are part of this problem, but I'm excited because it's a step in the right direction. It's showing that there's action, there's teeth. It looks like there is about to be a lawsuit against CIF and all the districts that aren't going to comply. So this is exactly the right direction that we need. We didn't need anything going through, just like the rule that CIF posted, their pilot program, so to say, that they did right before the meet, which, Jim, that pilot program was just they were in a scramble, right? But the reality is our girls still had to share a podium with the boy. And yes, they got their rightful placing, but they're also sharing it with the boy, and it still doesn't make sense. And I think they only did that to make this kind of all go away, because CIF is going to take a few breaks before any more competition. And that's what they do. They try to appease the public, make it look like everything is fine. And then when nobody's looking, we go back to the lunacy that's happening here in California.
There was, AB up there with a couple other girls in first place finishes, all on the same podium. Do you think this is at least an acknowledgement from CIF that they're willing to work on this issue a little bit, or try and make it so it gets the word fairness seems to come up on alternate sides of this issue, right? Do you think it's any more fair doing it that way? Do you think this is a path forward?
They're in a scramble because we forced their hands. Let's be real. We've been trying to tell them this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. They don't want the funding to be pulled. And what they did was sloppy, but I'm glad they did it because anybody with common sense would say, why are the girls invited back, first of all? And they're invited back to compete against the same boy and share the podium with them. And whether it is a step in the right direction, this is not when we give in. This is not when we give up, because the boys do not belong anywhere near the girls' sports. If you're going to make a separate division, it needs to be called co-ed. And that's the truth. Boys and girls can compete against each other if they want to share podiums and they want to do all that. Hey, by any means, I'm all cool with the co-ed division, but I also think that we all know where that's going to go. You're going to have very few athletes sign up to do that because we can see the boy that placed in the top 1 and 2 in 3 different divisions for the jumps, he wouldn't even place in the top 13 as a boy.
So in the moving forward, do you think this is going to be decided upon by politicians in this state, the CIF in this state, or is this ultimately going to wind up in a courtroom where it will have to be decided there?
This is going to be a long, drawn-out battle in court. I'm not going to stop until we get the final solution, and that's boys are boys, girls are girls. Put them in the right locker rooms, put them on the right sports teams. Enough with this. When they're adults, they can do whatever they want as long as it's not on our taxpayer dime.
It's worth noting that Shaw, by the way, is also running for state superintendent of schools. Meantime, California's current superintendent of schools is advising public schools to continue following state law despite those threats from the Justice Department. Superintendent Tony Thurmond said that the Justice Department can't force a rule change in this manner, adding, quote, state law on this issue has remained unchanged since 2013. California state law protects all students' access to participate in athletics in a manner that is consistent with their gender identity. We will continue to follow the law and ensure the safety of all of our athletes. Let's check back in with that question that we brought you, the poll question we brought you at the beginning of this town hall. Do you believe that transgender athletes should be allowed to compete in girls' high school sports? Right now, again, overwhelming majority of you, 95% are saying no to 5% that are saying they're okay with it. We want you to have your say. All you have to do is search KMPH.com or just scan the QR code on your screen. We'll see whether those numbers change later on in a couple of minutes. While the Department of Justice threatens legal action against California schools, President Trump is threatening to withhold federal funds. The president took to his Truth Social platform last month to caution Governor Gavin Newsom to not allow transgender athlete A.B. Hernandez to compete. In the post, he threatened to strip, quote, large-scale federal funding. Weeks later, the president still hasn't said exactly which federal funding that he's threatening to pull, but just yesterday, the Secretary of Education said that he is referring to educational funds. Again, since this issue involves student athletes, we wanted to see how pulling federal funds would affect California's Department of Education. Now, let's take a look. According to the Legislative Analyst's Office, California schools received around $8 billion in federal funding for the 2024-2025 school year. It sure sounds a lot, but if you take a look, that is just that red part right there. That is just 6%, just under 6% of all K through 12 funding in California. Now, according to the California Department of Education, of those $8 billion federal dollars, $33 million was in one-time funding still tied to the COVID response and the American Rescue Plan. Another $2.4 billion was used to help students from low-income families at school districts and charter schools. Almost $1.5 billion was used to help school districts provide special education and services to children with disabilities. Another $298 million was spent on English learners and immigrant students. $237 million was spent in grants to support teachers. $28 million was used for after-school programs, which are so crucial to so many families. And almost $6 million was spent on rural, low-income schools. By the way, smaller rural districts typically rely even more on their budget from when it comes to federal dollars, since there isn't as large of a local tax base. Most of the California Department of Education's money comes from the state's general fund, as well as property taxes. We heard from those who say that they're concerned about fairness in sports, but could there be a bigger issue at play here?
We're seeing another attack from Donald Trump and his administration. We know that they've been attacking transgender people since the campaign trail, right? Even before that, since his first term as in office. And now we're seeing it escalate to transgender youth and not only talking about their healthcare access, but now we're seeing this play out in schools, in sports.
People who are in and support the LGBTQ community say those against their very existence are using the issue of sports to target the community as a whole. Paul Villanueva with our sister station KBAK spoke with Kathy Moling, who is the founder and executive director of the California-based nonprofit Trans Family Support Services.
CIF has had an inclusive policy for over a decade. And trans girls have been participating in all sports across high school level during that time without issue. The issue came when adults decided that it was okay to bully a student. And as that escalated through mayors and presidents and everything else, it then became a bigger issue than just about this athlete, right? But if we come back to California state law and CIF policy had been in place for over a decade with no incidences. We want all kids to be able to participate in sports. We want all kids to be able to be engaged. They learn leadership and team building, and they want to hang out with their friends. And that's the way it should be. And adults should stay out of the bullying business of minors.
She's still a teenager. She's growing up and she's facing all this backlash. And I mean, you deal with bullies, I'm sure, that are your same age, but now you're dealing with bullies that are adults. So that's got to be a different level.
Adults and people in leadership, right? That's the problem. So CIF being inclusive is not new. What's new is this political pressure that comes from so many different levels. But as we saw in this, it came directly from the President of the United States. That's a misinformation campaign that was aimed at a minor, a child. Like, as a parent, I can't imagine the pressure that family feels that their own child has been called out by the President of the United States.
So, some people are saying she could perform, but to maybe have a division of their own. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we as an organization that serves trans youth and their families across the state really look forward to having engaging conversations with CIF, with Attorney Bonta's office, with the Superintendent Tony Thurman's office to come up with, this was a pilot program. How did they think it went? What do they think is what the future is going to look like? And for all of us to engage at a level that's going to allow for everyone to feel included and respected. I don't know what that is at this point, but I think that there are some really smart people that will get around that table and we'll all figure it out.
Another thing that people are arguing is that it comes to an issue of fairness in play, saying that, that transgender athletes who were assigned a different sex at birth, it's an issue of fair play in sports.
Sports is innately unfair. There are people who have athletic ability different than other people.
Other female athletes who competed were saying they were rooting for AB or Hernandez.
Correct.
And they most of them didn't see a problem with her performing. And it's like, they have these adults who are stepping in and, like you said, who haven't made an issue about it. The last 10 years this has been a fact, but even the female athletes are rooting for the transgender.
Her teammates and her competitors. Absolutely.
Yeah, which shows, that they're okay with it.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think
it shows we don't have a teen sports problem. We have an adult harassment and bullying problem.
Okay, so now we've heard from both sides of this issue. What are you thinking about this? Do you believe transgender athletes should be allowed to compete in girls' high school sports? So far, your opinions appear to be unchanged. 95% of you are saying no, but we want to hear from you. Keep those answers coming. If you haven't voted yet, all you have to do is scan the QR code right there on your screen, or search KMPH.com and click on this article that's already up on our website. Well, supporters of the LGBTQ community have also accused political hopefuls of attaching themselves to this issue, the controversy of trans athletes, as a way to gain votes. Republican candidate for governor Steve Hilton came to the central San Joaquin Valley to voice his concerns over AB 1266, the law that allows students to participate in sports based on the gender they identify with. Hilton says that if he becomes governor, he would demand the state legislature overturn that law.
Signs here. What is going on? That we have to say this. Save girls' sports. Protect our daughters. It's insane that this is necessary. Here's the action that I will take when I am governor of California. On day one, I will demand that the legislature repeal this cruel, unfair, dangerous law. If they refuse, I will sue, and we will win.
Hilton again says if the legislature doesn't comply, he would sue on state constitutional grounds. Just days before that, local and state lawmakers shared their concerns as well.
Transgenderism is not something to be celebrated, but psychologically treated by mental health professionals. These are disturbed folks, and the charade has gone on for too long.
Remove biological boys from girls' sports and restore the integrity of our girls' divisions.
We just heard from the mayor pro tem of Clovis. 2 other Clovis City Council members attended the same news conference, making them a target at the very next City Council meeting.
I don't recognize many of you anymore. I don't recognize the hate that so many of you on this council have decided is the face of Clovis.
But I have to say, what I've seen in the public media is not protecting. It's not standing up. It's people advocating for positions that they care about in order to advance a political narrative that is personal to them. And frankly, I find that shameful.
To compete. And as a mother, this is something that should be.
Fellow Clovis City Council member Lynn Ashbeck also voiced her concern. She said the city paid a high price financially and politically for what she called a manufactured conflict. She pointed out that the city spent $21,000 on providing extra police officers to manage the event. That money spent in police overtime. So what does the average Californian think about this? Well, the Public Policy Institute of California polled 1,600 people between late March and early April on the issue of Californians and education. The questions included one about this very issue. The PPIC asked, do you support or oppose requiring that transgender athletes compete on teams that match the sex they were assigned to at birth, not the gender they identify with? 65% of those polled said they support requiring trans athletes compete on teams with the sex that they were assigned at birth. 35% opposed it. Statewide survey director Mark Baldassari explained the findings more in depth to Fox 26 News director Jim Jacobs.
Roughly by 2 to 1, Californians said that they favor requiring transgender athletes compete on teams that match with the sex they were assigned with at birth. These results are pretty similar to what the national polls have also indicate that most Americans favor requiring transgender athletes to compete on teams that match the sex they were assigned with at birth. Now, in California, pretty much across demographic groups and regions of the state by different, by age, race, ethnicity, income, that there was, most people said that they supported requiring transgender athletes compete on teams that match the sex they were assigned with at birth. A couple of places if we look at the findings where the results were more mixed, among people who define themselves as liberals, most people said that they oppose that policy. Whereas people who were conservatives or middle of the road in their politics, they strongly favored the policy of requiring transgender athletes to compete on teams. Across regions of the state, people who lived in the inland regions of the state, the Central Valley and the Inland Empire. By about 70% of them said that they favored these policies. And the Bay Area was the one area where people had mixed views. But still a majority in the Bay Area, 52%, said that they supported requiring transgender athletes to compete on teams that match their sex that they were assigned with at birth. Differences between Democrats and Republicans also, with Republicans overwhelmingly in favor of these policies, whereas Democrats, again, more mixed. 49% said they supported, 50% said that they opposed.
It looks like you also broke it out by public school parents too. So you got parents. It's sort of another sample. I'm assuming that's K through 12. Can you kind of walk through that part too?
Yeah, 72% of public school parents, and we had enough public school parents in our poll to break out these results separately. But 72% said that they supported, and 28% said that they opposed. Generally, Californians are supportive of rights for transgender individuals, same-sex marriage, and they tend to be more liberal on social issues. But on this issue, it seems like people are thinking more about the sports and what's fairness, what seems fair to them in terms of the sports, rather than necessarily this is the way I feel about transgender individuals. It's about what's fair in sports.
Okay, so that was one poll. We're going to check back in with our poll in real time. So far, last check, almost 700 of you have voted already. Do you believe transgender athletes should be allowed to compete in high school girls' sports? Numbers have shifted just a bit by 1 percentage point. In this case, 6% of you say that it's yes, they should be allowed to compete. 94% of you are saying no. If you haven't voted yet, you can scan the QR code right there on your screen. Just point your camera there on your cell phone and it'll take you directly to that link where you can have your say as well. As we mentioned at the top of the hour, the controversy over trans athletes in girls' sports is playing out in other states too. Maine was the first hit with legal action by the White House for allowing transgender athletes to compete in girls' sports. In fact, in April, the Trump administration argued that Maine is violating the federal Title IX anti-discrimination law. The White House and Republicans have long argued biological males have an unfair advantage over biological females. Maine argues that it's not breaking any laws by allowing them to participate, and it responded with its own lawsuit.
Every other remedy. We tried to get Maine to comply. We don't like standing up here and filing lawsuits. We want to get states to comply with us.
Maine officials and Democrats argue barring transgender athletes from participating in sports is discrimination in and of itself. Meantime, Maine's Democratic Governor Janet Mills and President Trump have feuded over this as well. Take a look at this exchange.
Is Maine here, the governor of Maine? Well,
I'm here.
are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So you better comply because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding.
See you in court.
Every state, good. I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one. And enjoy your life after governor because I don't think you'll be in elected politics.
Mills, by the way, insists that her state will not be intimidated. Last week, members of a track team in the central Washington community of Tumwater wore T-shirts reading "Keep Women's Sports Female." That was after a transgender competitor won the girls' 400-meter title for the second year in a row. The Washington Interscholastic Activities Association refused to change bylaws over transgender athletes earlier in the year. The local school board previously backed a rule change to limit participation in girls' sports based on biological sex. The Tumwater School District says students have the right to free speech and wear the protest shirts even after their event was over. In Oregon, 2 high school athletes refused to step on the podium with another athlete who they say is transgender. That's video from the girls' track and field state championships last weekend. The Oregon School Activities Association policy allows transgender students to access athletics and activities consistent with their gender identity. Our sister station in Oregon spoke with one of the athletes who stepped off the podium in protest. She wants to make it clear that she says it's not about hate, but about fairness in girls' sports.
I just want everyone to know that this isn't just about me or the other girl that stepped down. It's about the girl in 9th place who should have had a place on that podium. It's about the girl who didn't qualify for state because they were beat by a biological male in districts. It's about the integrity and fairness of women's sports and the fact that if we allow biological males to continue competing in women's sports, we're invalidating all the work that women have done to get us fair and equal competition.
With other states allowing trans athletes in girls' sports, why is President Trump singling out California? Fox 26 anchor Monty Torres joins us with insight from Washington, D.C.
Sinclair National correspondent Kayla Gaskins. Welcome, Kayla. Thank you for joining us. You've been covering the issue of transgender athletes in I guess, women's sports. In fact, the most recent event we're talking about is the May 30th and 31st competition in Clovis, California. Transgender athlete A.B. Hernandez competing there, and the controversy surrounding that. But even before that, you've been involved in telling these stories regarding when the president signed his Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports executive order. Can you speak to that a little bit, how that's set up, what we're talking about now?
Yeah, Monty, this issue that we're seeing erupt in states like California, actually the weekend of California State Track and Field Championships, we saw an array of issues in other states like Washington State, Minnesota, Maine, everybody having their competitions at the same time. But this issue really began years ago once we started to see transgender athletes participating in women's sports, and no one really knew how to navigate this space, really a brand new issue. Now, Donald Trump, during the campaign trail, really latched on to some people's frustration with this issue. It was one of his key campaign promises that he ran on, was this idea of protecting women and girls sports. We heard him mention time and time again that he would take action on this topic. So, Monty, it really wasn't at all surprising when early in February he holds this big event at the White House and he's surrounded by all these young female athletes, and he signs an executive order that they've called the Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports Act. So essentially what this does is it ensures entities that receive federal funding that they follow Title IX, or they follow the Trump administration's interpretation of Title IX. And then this really kickstarted this domino effect. The next day, the day after Trump signed the order, the NCAA announced their new policy prohibiting transgender athletes from competing in women's sports. So we're really just kind of starting to see the ripple effects, the after effects of all of this.
And that sort of first came to a head, I guess, February 21st, when the confrontation happened between the president and Governor Mills of Maine in the White House, right?
Yeah, we saw that now infamous exchange. Again, I've been covering this topic for months, and that exchange keeps coming up because Maine was really one of the first states to come out strongly against President Trump on this issue, saying absolutely not, we will not be following the administration's interpretation of Title IX and the administration's views against having transgender athletes compete in women's and girls' sports, saying, no, Maine's going to do it our way. Well, that led to this confrontation at the White House where the governor said to the president, we'll see you in court. And Trump said, no, we'll see you in court. And Monty, they will see each other in court. But that case now has been put on hold, and we'll see it advance in December. But as for the summer, nothing new going on in Maine right now.
Do you see a difference in the way the Trump administration handled that in Maine with what's happening now in California?
California has been a different story, right? We saw the governor of Maine come out immediately against this. And then, Monty, we saw Governor Gavin Newsom in Maine go on Charlie Kirk's conservative influencer podcaster, his show, and say he does see some problems with transgender athletes competing in the sports, and that he sees it as wrong and as unfair. And so now the governor's really walked himself into this interesting place where he's trying to balance some of the politics and divisions within the Democratic Party, how to handle this, back with his own personal views on it, which he shared during that interview with Charlie Kirk earlier this year. And now the administration has really zeroed in kind of full force on California. And that probably has to do with Gavin Newsom being a very prominent voice in the Democratic Party.
You know, some of the other states involved in similar conflicts like this that you mentioned in your stories, Oregon, Washington, I think, was it Minnesota as well? Have they had the similar sort of confrontation with the White House? Has it been handled differently in each state?
No, they haven't. Those other 3 states that you just mentioned have flown under the radar a little bit, at least for now, when it comes to the DOJ taking action against them, or from the president threatening those states directly and threatening federal funding for those states. So when it comes to the federal funding issue, which that's all tied to Title IX, he's really going after California and he's really going after Maine. Those similar threats have not been made at this point for Oregon, for Washington State, and for Minnesota that are experiencing the same type of controversies that California has seen play out over the past couple of weeks. But Monty, I don't think that means they won't see consequences. I just don't think they've got, the administration and the DOJ has gotten there quite yet.
Sinclair National correspondent Kayla Gaskins. Kayla, thank you for your time. Liz, back to you.
All right, thanks so much, Monty. We're going to take one final look at our town hall poll. Do you believe transgender athletes should be allowed to compete in girls' high school sports? 94% of you, an overwhelming majority, are saying no. 6% have said yes. At last check, again, around 700 of you have given us your opinion, have chimed in by clicking over on that QR code or on our website and placing your vote. And we thank you so much for your participation, as this is, again, taking and getting input from everyone in the community. So we thank you for your participation. And that is it for our digital town hall tonight. We want to thank those who watched online across the state and on the Fox 26 YouTube page. Stay with Fox 26 and our Sinclair sister stations, as this issue is clearly far from resolved, but we will update you every step of the way. Have a good night.